Um, all right. I am in pain, so I'm going to end this a bit early today. Um, I'm trying to think, is there anything else that I wanted to hit on? I will say one thing. Whether the whole Tomahawk missile stuff, the attacks on Russian energy, I would like to point out that I pointed out, I think like a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago when all of this was taking place, that this is obviously the United States that's backing these attacks on the Russian energy process. The reason was somewhat obvious. If the United States is trying to get Europe, supposedly, trying to get India and China to not use Russian energy, then it's a hell of a coincidence that all of a sudden Zelensky and Ukraine, who is effectively pushed in a proxy of the United States, starts to go after Russian energy almost as a specific thing of policy that they're effectively running with. It doesn't take a genius to say, well, hey, they are trying to do this on two sides of the coin, one militarily, and the other one mafia diplomatically, if such a thing exists. So I would like to point out that I did point that out. 2, all of this is evidence of weakness, not strength. Meaning this is not a situation of a president being able to go to countries and bully those countries in the way that he would typically do in pretty much every other country. What this is a president who has no cards, to take a phrase or turn a phrase from what Donald Trump was telling Zelensky, has no cards. No, he has no cards, and is looking for cards by which to play. Meaning this is him searching for leverage, searching for relevance. This is not a man with relevance or leverage. This is him finding, looking, digging under every corner that he could get his hands on to try to find something that he can use to get some level of leverage in order to deal with Putin from a position of strength, which means that by definition, you're not dealing with him from a position of strength. You're dealing with him from a position of weakness. I hope you get my point. There's a difference in those things. Everything that Trump is doing up to this point demonstrates what he doesn't have, not what he does have. There's a difference in those things. If he does indeed give Tomahawk missiles to Zelensky, which is, again, a plea for relevance, a plea for leverage, you don't have many of those. There's that. And B, even if you do what Mark is saying you do, you may end up in a world of hurt, meaning you cannot predict the Russian response. And if you can't predict the Russian response, that may be the thing that tips the scale. Meaning Putin may be a diplomat. True. Putin has done everything in his power, bending over backwards in order to prevent a third world war. And this is against recklessness coming out of Europe and coming out of NATO. And while it's true that he has done everything he has to bend over backwards to try to prevent that third world war, if you push him into a corner, he will not have a choice but to respond. As evidence of this, it's a special military operation. It took Russia, 8 years to get to the point of engaging in a special military operation? But he did it. That's the point I'm trying to make. While he may be a diplomat, while he may look for outs where he doesn't necessarily have to get into these kind of direct military conflicts or, let's say, escalate the war beyond the special military operation and be willing to absorb attacks with the idea that we're winning, we're sticking with the plan, we're not changing our plan for any kind of emotional flare-up, we're sticking with the plan since the plan is working. If you push him into a corner, he will not have a choice but to respond. Now, whether Trump gets that, whether he realizes that, whether the people who are around Donald Trump are telling him that, they're probably not, especially if they indeed want to somehow escalate the war, or they believe that Putin's pragmatism is effectively weakness and that they can effectively skate, that he would remain pragmatic. He will have generals, he would have media, he would have Russians screaming for blood. And while he may be pragmatic, he may also listen to that cry and scream for blood. Be very careful the way you push him. If Putin was the guy that they say he is, meaning that the US media say he is, I have a hard time believing they would be testing him in this way. But who knows? Trump has said that he wants to have a conversation with Putin, and he apparently will tell him about the bluff, about the missiles, in which case Putin will probably tell him his response if he does that. very politely. Now, Trump has said himself that Putin is always very polite in these conversations. But I think what you're saying is a president that's effectively flailing. He ran with this idea that he was going to somehow end the war, that A, he didn't understand, B, he didn't understand diplomacy and the way that the Russians dealt with it, C, he had this American exceptionalist mindset, this hubris that comes along almost like the nuclear codes with being president of the United States. And within that fog of hubris and delusion, he believed, well, I'll just have a conversation with Putin, Vladimir, as I like to call him. We'll just talk. We'll just have a conversation. And I'll get him to do, oh my God, he told me no. He told me to go F myself. Politely. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know why this is taking place. And the problem that the United States is having, and frankly, not just with Russia, with China also, and on some level even with India, is that we've gotten so accustomed to being able to have this mindset that we can direct events around the world, that we can tell countries what they should and shouldn't do, that we can exert some level of leverage, whether economic or, for that matter, kinetic, that they will listen, they will shiver in their boots, and they will somehow respond to something that we're effectively telling them to do. Whereas now you're dealing with equals. You're dealing with countries that are not taking a lesson from you, that you can't do anything in real terms about, whether it's militarily in Russia's case, unless you just want to go to nuclear war, or economically in China's case, who at this point seems like the one that knocks, as opposed to the US that is actually playing catch up in regards to something that China has effectively done dealing with the chip issue. I'm sorry, rare earths. My point is that we're in a new norm. This is a new world. And just kind of like a kid having to deal with a new school and the rules of that new school, the US is going to have to learn that this is a new world, that these countries are not necessarily going to accept the lesson. Yeah, you may get Indonesia's president saying, hey, can I speak to your kid? Hashtag for reasons. Reasons I don't want to disclose here, but I want to talk to your kid. Or somebody telling Joe Biden, hey, can I speak to Hunter? Or somebody telling Hillary Clinton, hey, can I speak to the Clinton Foundation? I hope you get my point. But that's not what's happening right now. What you're getting, even with Putin being differential, is not one budge, one iota in regards to saying, this is what we want. Here's the surrender document that we need you to sign. And over again, that same document is being presented with the caveat, if you wait, there will be additional items associated with this document, meaning there'll be new territories. Sign it now to get the best deal. If not, we can have this conversation in 6 months, in which case there will be more territories that are added to this document. It is a surrender document. The document is not going to change. Or what do you get China, who's just saying F off? Just Xi Jinping, just. That's all. He just sends a text message to Trump. He's like, I think that guy just sent me a middle finger. And another video comes in, another middle finger. The US is going to have to get accustomed to this. And you're going to have to get accustomed to dealing with countries, not as vassals in the way that you can embarrass and humiliate Europe or some of these other countries, but on some level as equals. And Donald Trump seems to be completely and radically incapable of doing so, and is dealing with a bit of ontological shock at the prospect of having to deal with a country on even terms. He seems incapable of doing it. So what is he trying to do? He goes back to his default. I need to get leverage. How do I get leverage? Oh, let me go after the oil industry. Let me go after countries diplomatically to try to get them to not use Russian energy. Let me do blah, 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 none of which is working because this is existential from the Russian point of view. The other part to that is that the United States, under normal circumstances, and it's somewhat fascinating, doesn't typically care. And herein, again, lies one of the problems. They don't care about why a process is taking place. They don't care why a crisis is going on, why a war is taking place, why a country did X or Y, the objectives of a particular country, the values of a particular country. We don't care. We're hegemon. We don't need to care. We need you to bend according to our will. It's kind of like a cop, where you're trying to explain something to a cop. The cop doesn't care. He doesn't care. It's like, you have cancer, you need to get, I don't care. You have an appendix rupture, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Get in the back seat or I'm going to beat you to death and kill you. That's the way cops act. That's the way hegemons act. They don't care about the reason this conflict is taking place. They don't care about the historical context. Donald Trump is not going to understand Putin taking generals to the grave of these Catherine the Great. He's not going to get that. That's too subtle for him. He's not going to know the history of that stuff where he could put two and two together. He was just going to be like, oh, Putin took him to the grave. That's as far as it goes. Unless you put it in a coloring book, unless you put very bright pictures. And even then, he may have a hard time grasping what is taking place. I'm trying to point out that for all intents and purposes, it is typically the hegemon's purview to not give a shit about the events that are happening in the world in the context of why they're happening. We have objectives, we have agendas, and we have things that we want to accomplish. That's it. That doesn't work in this. I'm saying this is an environment that doesn't work in this situation. Do you honestly believe that the United States cared about the context of Gaza and Israel? No, we had objectives that we wanted to accomplish. We pushed objectives. Do you think the U.S. honestly cares about picking a random fire around the globe? We have objectives that we want to accomplish, and we're pushed to accomplish those objectives. Historical context and those things matter less, or they matter only insofar as for us to accomplish whatever that particular objective is. If there's a group that is in opposition to the government, hey, great. They're fascists, we don't care. They're perfectly fine. Al-Qaeda needs to overthrow Syria, fair enough. Give that guy a gun, let the guy do what he needs to do. Hey, do you care that they're ISIS and they were killing Americans? Nope, don't care one iota. If we need to give kill squads to South America, give them a gun, give them money, let them do what they do. We accomplish our objectives. Do you care what was taking place on the ground in regards to the people being harmed? We do not. We do not. You get decades of that. And now you've hit your head on a situation as hard as I hit my head, if not harder, where you can't do that. Where in order to actually try to get a deal, by the way, that you can't accept, but in order to get that deal, you would have to understand the context, the Russian context, and how they see it, especially in the context of the way they see it as being existential. If you can't get that, then you will never get a deal on this. Hence, you won't get a deal on this. I hope you get my point. This is a new norm. This is the US approaching something that it doesn't have to typically approach. And that is countries telling it to F off. And not just F off from a position of weakness. This is not like Vietnam, where you go and you murder a bunch of Vietnamese and you get kicked out of the country. This is not even like Afghanistan, where you be somewhere for 20 years, then you get kicked out and evicted out of the country. This is not that. This is you losing on a massive fucking scale in front of the entirety of the world, where the entire world can see that Russia stood up against all of Europe and the US and won. Now, the problem is that you have to deal with them on equal terms. And the problem is that you don't know how to do it. That's an issue. Hence, the war will continue. And whether Trump realizes it or not, there's a lot of reporting that says part of the reason that Trump just didn't walk is because Trump didn't want to get blamed for Ukraine. I think that's partially true. I think part of it is he holds Europe in contempt. And maybe he did at one point thought, well, I'll just walk. This is not my war. But the problem is he didn't tell the public that he was going to walk. He told the public he was going to get a deal. And he told them something that he was completely and entirely incapable of effectively doing. So your only other option is to walk, which he doesn't want to accept blame. And you would get people screaming in his ears, screaming in the political space, screaming in the blob, in which case Donald Trump, being a weak leader, doesn't have the capability of doing that either. Whether he realizes it or not, at some point, Ukraine will fall. And Ukraine will fall on his watch. And whether you get blamed for losing the war from walking, or whether you get blamed from losing the war several years later when it is clearly and obviously your war, which one is worse? As for China, China is the one that knocks. The amount of trade that the United States has with China is what, like 15%? That's like one city in China. Put it in context. They have been maneuvering. Obviously, it would hurt in the short term, but they have been maneuvering to be able to do without, especially since that first term where Donald Trump effectively went after China, in which case you would imagine a conscious, rational country will be prepared for the second time that that same person comes in office and tries to do the same shit over again. China didn't bring out the rare earth thing out of the blue. The US had been salami slicing the deal that they made back, several months ago, in which case, finally, China responded. And of course, because you have a country of psychopaths and liars, the response is, oh my God, I can't believe China just did this. They're attacking the world. I can't believe they're doing this. Yes, they're dishonest. That dishonesty is for public consumption because obviously global South and at the very least the countries in China, the states in China, they don't buy that nonsense. This is a new norm. This is a teaching moment. That teaching moment is going to get very choppy, to put it mildly. What I mean by choppy, I'm trying to think of the exact word for it. I always said the word. Rising power, established power. Yeah, I always get the word wrong, so I'm not even going to try to say it. But this rising power thing is not just individual states. This is not Austrian-Hungarian Empire going after Serbia and trying to teach Serbia a lesson. This is happening on a different scale. This is blocks of countries: China, Iran, India, Russia, etc. The United States, Europe, can add in Japan, give or take, depending upon whether or not they're pissed off at the economic stuff that's going on. You have blocks of countries. You can really get rid of some of the other ones and just end up with India, China, Russia, the US, and Europe, with the US being the main driver in this. And the US either having to escalate in an actual trade war, which we're in now, where the US will either have to back down from the trade war or escalate the trade war, with China saying, we don't give a shit. We're in this. We're in this till the wheels fall off. We've been here for 5,000 years. We'll be here for 5,000 more when you, as an upstart, vanish into the history of time. These are two crises that the US has started, initiated, and is now not necessarily all that clear on how to extricate itself from. But it will learn. It will learn. Hopefully the rest of the world will be here after. Do you see an off-ramp? Do you see an off-ramp? If you're talking about direct war, then maybe you can see an off-ramp. If you have enough bodies coming back, if you have enough flag-draped coffins coming back, okay, well, the public is going to feel some kind of way about that. Why are we doing this war? Why is this taking place? Why are these people getting killed? Meaning you will, by definition, like an equal opposite reaction of the public saying this is outrageous, especially if it's not a war that they don't believe in. Is that happening in Ukraine? Now, up to this point, Ukrainians are coming back in coffins, but Ukraine is not an independent actor. It's not a sovereign state. Ukraine is effectively a state being led and governed by the US and by, say, the UK in some respects. The catch becomes, does Europe accept Ukraine failing? Or does Europe at some point get involved into the war? Meaning, does Europe delusion of grandeur push them, this idealism that's nonsense? But does this at a certain point when Kiev is about to fall, when Donbass falls, is there a point where they say to themselves, if we're going to get involved, we need to do so with the Ukrainian military standing as opposed to the Ukrainian military collapsing? Maybe. If Kiev is about to fall, do they gin up enough screaming and hollering and hysteria where they come up with some justification to get into the war with the full belief that the United States ultimately will back them in doing so? Understand, they may not know as a flat fact, but if you think you have ultimately a blank check from a superpower and a hegemon, that even if the hegemon is saying, we are not going to get involved in this, do they really believe that? Do they really believe that the US political instrument and political institutions, if Europe really did get involved directly in the war with Russia, that the US would just sit it out? We're not in it. You went into Ukraine. Article 5 doesn't apply, buddy. You made that choice. Does the US really take that point of view? Like, this shit is calamity. It really is. I mean, it can go to fuckery. So, Matthew, I don't know. I this is reading tea leaf stuff. But the fact that it's hard to see Europe taking an off-ramp, put it this way, I am very pessimistic for the immediate future. I'm very optimistic for the long term, whatever that long term means. You all have a fantastic rest of your day. I did not tame the sparrow, Jamal. What? I did not tame the sparrow? It just wasn't afraid of us. Okay, I don't know what that means. I did not tame the sparrow. It just was afraid of us. I don't know if you're referring to the book, The Sparrow, with the, what is it? Emilio finds maybe we should do book reviews on this channel. Maybe we should do book reviews. The Sparrow is a disturbing book, but I don't think you're talking about the book. I think you're talking about something else. It's like the president, what is it? Emilio Jesuit goes to another planet because he hears singing. And he's like, oh my God, those aliens sing so beautifully. They must be a beautiful people. They must be a beautiful race. They must have a beautiful soul. And he gets to the planet and he meets these beings. And they interfere with they interfere with those beings, not realizing that there's another group of beings that has a symbiotic relationship with the beings that they're interfering with. And once those other beings get there, those beings are predators. They're like built as predators. And that priest is effectively taken. That priest is viciously raped. They hobble him, basically ripping the skin off his fingers and whatnot to make him completely dependent upon his master, which is one of these other beings. Yeah, that book is rough. Oh, that book is rough. That book is just fucking rough. Matthew. But if Europe got involved, it gets wrecked in hours. Well, not hours. I mean, it's still a war. I mean, they were saying, at the very least, some of the analysis said that Europe couldn't field a military of like 40, 50,000. Now, if you put that in context, how long is that in the context of the current war? I mean, we're talking about a heavy industrialized war where Russia has been killing and dying for the last 3 years. They're going to get mauled. They're obviously going to get mauled. That's not really the point about them getting mauled. Whoever they send into Ukraine is a tripwire. It's a tripwire. Those people will be sacrificed. If they go in and enforce, at that point, that's a declaration of war. But again, if they are going in, Article 5 doesn't apply. Whether Article 5 applies or not, though, is secondary to the point of whether the U.S. is going to stay out of a war like that. In which case, we're talking about a world war. Yeah, man, it can go into fuckery. They will get mauled. It's not going to be ours, but they will get mauled. We will be in a world of shit when that happens. We will be in a world of shit. All bets will be off. All bets will be off. They'll need Turkey to be sure to pitch in the Black Sea. Well, that's the other thing, Odessa. I mean, I assumed going back several years ago that Odessa was going to be one of the places that Russia was going to take. A, it's a Russian city. B, when they set that fire there and murdered all of those people. C, it allows them to hobble Ukraine in the context of the Black Sea, where Russia can't be threatened in the context of Ukraine being able to fire missiles and stuff like that. My boss at the time was like, dude, how the hell are they going to get there? Like, how are they going to get to that point? Well, at this point, the Russian plan has been to demilitarize Ukraine. And at the point where they take Donbass, will they have a capability of stopping them from taking Odessa? Odessa has to be on the list of places that they're going to go after at some point. So how does that deal with Turkey, and does Turkey get involved? Again, Article 5 may not apply if indeed it's the Europeans that are the ones that are the aggressors in this, meaning if they enter Ukraine, if they have their coalition of the willing, as they like to call them, then Article 5 doesn't apply. If they create a false flag, that's different, which is why I'm concerned about false flags. Think back to Syria, for example. If you remember the chemical weapons thing, where they were screaming that Assad had chemical weapons, that Assad used the chemical weapons because Obama had said, well, this is a red line. And then you ask the question, well, why would Assad do that? Why on earth would Assad, after taking like 90% of his territory back in coalition with the Russians and the Iranians, why would he need to use chemical weapons when he is obviously in the whip, has the whip hand? And of course, their response, because he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. He's a cartoon villain. Now, obviously, the only people that the chemical weapons benefited were the terrorists, because their life was coming to an end, meaning they were facing oblivion, they were facing extinction. And the only way that they had any chance in that war was to pull in a larger power into the war on their side. Well, same thing with Ukraine, right? If you are facing oblivion and you're facing extinction, and the Europeans are priming themselves, especially using this idea of false flags and drones and all of this other nonsense that they effectively were using. If a false flag happens, will they call it a false flag? Or will they use it as a pretext? And obviously, Ukraine would have every justification in the world to be the one to do it. But will the United States say, well, it was obviously the Ukrainians that did that? Why would the Russians do that, considering they're about to take the entirety of Ukraine? Will the Europeans say that, considering many of them want to get effectively feed their people into the war in the first place, believing that the United States would get involved? No, I'm deeply concerned about a false flag. But those stupid idiots may be willing to do it, even though they're completely unprepared to fight that war. But in their mind, it would be daddy that would assist them in the conflict. And at that point, the question becomes, what does the U.S. do? I don't know. It's obviously fuckery, to put it mildly. Like, we would be in a world of, say, shit and piss at that point. Yes, Europe will get wrecked. Europe will get wrecked. I mean, as soon as you have a war between nuclear powers, Russia will go straight to, no, that's not true. It will not wait for the West losing internet. I don't know if that's true. I mean, does Putin really come across to you as somebody who would immediately go to nukes? I put all the threats aside for the moment. Does that really come across to you as him being that guy? Russia has said that most likely they would absorb, meaning they're not a first strike nation. The U.S. is a first strike nation. If anything, it would probably start a conventional, and it would escalate to nukes. I mean, that's the whole plan with China, right? This notion of escalation. We can fight and win a nuclear war. Well, okay, sure, sure. Russia is a massive landmass. I don't think their first thought will be, let's just nuke Europe. Nor do I think that will be the first thought for Europe or the United States. It would probably be escalatory. The catch becomes, though, the moment that it's clear that one side is losing, then obviously the nuclear thing is going to become louder in regards to, well, we can't lose this war. We can't lose this war. We need to end the world as opposed to lose the war. I mean, yeah, it goes to fuckery. Sleepwalking into a larger conflict. Dangerous, Matthew.